Yeah, I realized that this has some words on it. It has some date to it, but when I was reading through it, I thought this is just too good not to share. But this is called. I'm still a fan of Aquabats. Of course, it's no longer on television, but I still have the CDs. They're a sensational band that I love them. They're along the same lines of Twerp and Ninja Sex Party, which actually I'm wearing right now. Support. And Starbomb. Spike Jonze is one of the older ones. He's probably the first comedic, other than Cheech and Chong and all that. But this is in the same kind of vein. And this was a fan fiction I call Diamond in the Rough. And it's, of course, about I'm always attracted to not really long-haired, but men who have dark hair and dark eyes. So you know that I'm going to have a thing for eagle bones. So, of course, this stems from that attraction. But this is an Aquabats fan fiction. Eagle Bones meets a rocker chick, Genevieve. Well, that's very French. That's actually very appropriate because I'm going to be dressed as Francine Bonifoy rather than Francis Bonifoy over at Comic-Con. Hopefully I won't frighten away future mates. Or a future mate, not mates. What is wrong with me? One will do. Anyway, Diamante, Jen Dynamite. I love it. Who could play a rather intense bass solo. Yeah, don't dismiss the bass player ever. I love bass players. You know, they're very grossly misunderstood and highly discounted, and just they're not given the respect that they need. They just they're very underappreciated. She has a sonic voice, a technique to disarm her enemies, and a je ne sais quoi. It makes her a valuable ally as well as a diplomat. Chapter 1, On the Road. The battle tram was oh, that makes no sense. The Aquabats was on the road, I should say. The battle tram was on the road once again, and the Aquabats were feeling satisfied by their recent concert. Yeah, that sentence was kind of bungled. Pardon. I didn't even realize that until I read. I thought, whoa, that's, yeah, way to grammar. Anyway, flower of adversity. That would be me. Most of the money had gone to charity and other beneficial not-for-profits along their route. The rest went to maintaining the cost of living, whether it was keeping their tire pressure in the tram up or making certain that they were fed, hydrated, and their clothes were laundered every weekend. Jimmy and the other Aquabats were beginning to feel tired and found there was a truck stop not far from their next destination, Albuquerque. Yeah, I like that name. Quirkiness of it. The Bats all settled down for the night with a typical bedtime story for Jimmy. This one was about the Pudding Snatcher, a fiendish gnome that comes to life only at night to satisfy his desire for sweets, mainly that of puddings. Ooh, frightening. Often he is called the flan napper due to the fact that he stuffs himself with as much of the rich Latin dessert as he can. Well, it makes sense. And also, it wouldn't be too far to surmise that he would also stuff his cheeks with creme brulee if he could. Knowing this is only a kid's tale, the bats slumber throughout the night. Tomorrow will be another day of singing, dancing, and showboating for the masses. Eagle Bones was the first to awaken. Ricky had recently stocked the kitchen with healthy foods and snacks. Eagle Bones staggered to the refrigerator and got himself Greek yogurt with blueberries on the bottom, poured himself some orange juice, and watched the other bats trudge into the kitchen. Fairly after having breakfast, he became extremely chipper. Great day, isn't it? Been nicer since the temps have cooled down. What do you think Albuquerque will be like? He said, between satisfied bites and a big glug of orange juice. Dunno, but don't you think it's been kind of boring without any monsters to fight recently? MC Bat Commander asked. Yeah, I've been kind of bored. I really want to hit something, and the punching bag in the training room ain't cutting it, Crash admitted. I wouldn't go that far, Crash, Jimmy said, diverting his attention to a greasy spoon on the roadside called Larry's. I'm starving. Anyone want to try Larry's out? He questioned. It's probably a good idea for us to refuel before we get moving again. We're not too far from our concert destination after all, Ricky chimed in cheerily. MC Bat Commander and all the others agreed. It didn't look so bad after all, despite the trailer park it was contained in. Some of the best diners they had eaten at had the same sort of vibe about them, and the food had always been unbelievably good, not to mention fattening. McLarson had pondered about the flying napper, wondering if he was real, just like the floating eye of death. The whole notion seemed really idiotic anyway. Then again, the eye wasn't a kid's tale. He didn't let his mind become too distracted with the probability or possibility of a flan napper, if indeed it existed. Instead, he downed the blintzes on his plate and let out a raucous belch. Man, I'm too full to even move. Those blintzes just KO'd my hunger. Maybe a little nap before the concert wouldn't hurt, Crash said. The others agreed. Upon returning to the tram, Jimmy placed it into autopilot again, and the five of them rested for the remainder of the trip. Chapter 2. Genevieve Diamante. Jen had always been different from other women, especially considering her talent. She had a wicked fast bass. She was a wicked fast bass player, and her band members, the Fatales, knew that the bass held unhindered power. Oh, yes. They didn't know that she had a sonic voice and could use it to disarm enemies if need be. Black Canary throwback, maybe? Most likely. Either that or Cersei from Generator Rex. She had used this once before when she saw an old lady getting mugged on the street. Typically, she wouldn't have gotten involved, but this ability was mysterious as well as it was helpful. She didn't know where it came from or why, but she didn't question it. Insta-talent. She used it for the benefit of others rather than to cause the audience members at the Fatales concert to go deaf. Make your eardrums bleed. I'm sorry, I had to. She wondered if she could ever use this power for her benefit as well as her charisma and diplomacy. Secretly, she wanted to be an Aquabat, and she had even sewn her own costume. In the vein of Spider-Man Homecoming, maybe? Right down to the smallest detail. It was her ultimate dream, but sadly, the Aquabats seemed to be a gentleman-only superhero group. Next morning, Jen couldn't believe her eyes. It was the Bats' battle tram! She had seen this time and time again, even in her dreams. She felt like a kid in a candy shop and desperately wanted to try her uniform out to see how it fit. Also, she hoped that she could impress the Bats in preparation to become an honorary member. She knew she had no training, but she had plenty of pluck and spunk, as well as determination and drive. If nothing else, those qualities alone she felt would impress the pants off of just about anyone. Chapter 3. The Mysterious Nosher. Ooh, frightening, scary. During the concert, when the Bats turned the performance into a sing-along, Jen knew every song they had sung. Secretly, she had purchased every album that the Bats had recorded to date and was a covert fan of theirs. If Jen's friends from the band had seen her, they would probably have laughed at her fangirl tendencies. Before Jen knew what had happened, she was pulled on stage by the commander, and she belted out the tunes with gusto. Eaglebones was impressed by her control and elocution. Few singers singing rock and roll were ever understood, but her diction was perfect. He wondered if she could play any instrument, but that question would have to wait until later. Meanwhile, outside a nuclear waste facility, in the Green Hills, something unusual began forming. It had been once discarded, the once discarded body of a police officer that had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Bizarrely, and even slightly eerily, the nuclear waste had reincarnated him. Certainly, he was no longer his handsome self. There were some parts hanging from sinews and arms that were double-jointed that weren't so naturally. Bucky Hobart didn't care, though. He was starving, and all that was on his mind were sweets wherever he could find them. Eaglebones and Jen talked for hours after the concert, and the two had so much in common, including their adulation and adoration of music. There wasn't a bass guitar in the tram that Eaglebones had one a Gibson from a Gibson guitar contest long ago. It was this is my favorite sentence. It was a Les Paul, veneer, sheen, and immaculate. Jen was almost afraid to touch it. since it was so sacred. But before she knew it, she had gone into her typical musical-induced trance and began plucking out a monster bass line. Eagle Bones, awed, thrilled, clapped, and whistled. "You must be in a band of some kind," he complimented. "Yes, in fact I am. I am the bass player of the Femmes. Sort of ironic considering I'm their leader and main vocalist," she said, lowering her head coyly. Eaglebones was quite handsome, and she had been caught by his chocolate, hypnotizing eyes. He couldn't help but feel attracted to her as well, an instant magnetism that only artists truly comprehend. I like that line too. Instant magnetism that only artists could truly comprehend. While they were chatting away, laughing and joking about like little children, there was an odd, disheveled, and somewhat scruffy-looking shadow lurching back and forth into the food court at the concert. He was eating everything in sight. As it grew closer, Eaglebones and Jen could see it was a zombie cop with a lust for sugary snacks. "We have to stop him before he eats everything that isn't nailed down," Jen suggested. Unfortunately, the officer had begun to eat all the posts that secured the tarps over the temporary booths, and the happy concertgoers became scared, running from the freakish cop as fast as their legs could carry them. Eaglebones and Jen began playing their guitars, zapping the mysterious nosher into dust without breaking a sweat. Jen, curious about what had animated the poor hapless cop, went to investigate if there were any clues about his enigmatic regeneration. The nosher, it seems, was brought to life by this radioactive waste, she said, pointing at the trail of obvious lime green glowing fluid. "Pfft, lame. How cliché is that?" Eaglebones remarked. Then he paused, feeling as if wasn't going to be the first zombie that they would see unless something was done. "You know that factory, Obermann Corps?" Jen questioned. Eaglebones had come across an article about how much safer and economical it was only a few weeks earlier. His mention of it to the team was dismissed quickly once any mention of food, video games, paintballing, or other sweaty male bonding activities were suggested. "Yes, but Jimmy was the only one who took me seriously. That is, until we came across a Fry's electronics store during our U.S. tour, which we're still rolling on," Eaglebones said. He slapped his palm to his head. He couldn't believe how moronic he had been. He and the band were on a schedule, and they were probably in the lounge asking where he had gone to. But he knew he could use Jen's help. "Do you want to become an honorary Aquabat?" he asked. She was already dressed perfectly for the part, and she looked dynamite, hence her surname. Eaglebones couldn't help but stare a bit at her perfect curves and her lovely hourglass figure. Shaking his head to focus his thoughts at the present, he asked if she had her own transportation. "Yes, why wouldn't I? It's a Vespa. I'm sure it can keep up with the tram." I love this line too. "It's got quite a bit of torque, and I modified it for that very reason." Eaglebones was beginning to believe that there wasn't anything that this woman, who would soon become known as Diamond, couldn't do. I don't know why I was going into kind of an accent there. Chapter 4, An Armada of Flan-nappers and Sugar Addicts. Obermann Corps had been dumping nuclear waste to a non-disclosed area. I should have had that in quotations. That would have been funnier. Where the mobsters of old had dumped corpses of non-cooperative mouthpieces to the mob, tax evaders, or ruffians who simply got caught on the wrong side of whatever circumstance to land them in that retention pond. That sounds ominous. That's dark. Obermann didn't know the waste itself was reanimating these corpses. Apparently, whatever was in the waste had the effect of insatiable hunger, particularly that for confectionaries and indulgences. "Do you think we'll be able to hold back this zombie horde, EB?" Jen questioned curiously. "EB? I like the sound of that." "I've actually radioed the others back of the tram. We could split up," Eaglebones stated. Jen actually wanted to fight by Eaglebones' side, so this deflated her elation, only momentarily. Moments before the horde began forming, the Aquabats were able to defeat them, mainly with the power of Eaglebones' axe. Using her diplomacy, Jen was able to convince Obermann Corps that dumping the waste had caused the armies of the undead that were beginning to rise. They shut down operations and agreed to swim to help the switch. I did not spell switch correctly, to healthier sources of power with fewer emissions, but the last cascade of waste had trickled down. I loathe trickle-down effect. Of the opposite side of the factory into a graveyard, not that far away. This will lead to nothing but badness. Spoiler alert. Jen hadn't seen this unfortunate series of events take place. Oh, what's the matter with the book series? Sorry, I had to. So she felt that the Bats' work was done for the day. Little did she know that she would be proving herself to the Bats once again. The Bats were supposed to be heading to California when a news reporter suddenly interrupted their regularly scheduled cartoons with an update. How dare him? Oh, come on. The episode was just getting good. I was certain that El Horror would be foiled, Crash said. Horror is always foiled by the Silver Crusader, though. That's the whole point of the cosmonauts, Jimmy said. Yeesh, spoiler alert much, Crash griped, shaking his head right and left. Spoilers or not, cosmonauts had become a fixation in their lives. Eagle Bones hadn't been talking much, and it wasn't like him to be so contemplative. Why the long face, buddy? Commander questioned, realizing Falcon Hawk wasn't his usual upbeat self. I think I met my soulmate back there. Problem is, I didn't ask for her phone number or email or anything, Eagle Bones said, nearly breaking down. Oh man, bummage. Ricky Fitness chimed in. Not helping, Rick, Commander fired back reprovingly. The commander directed Falcon Hawk's attention back to the crisis back in Albuquerque. She may still be there, so you can exchange information that way. This time, don't let the opportunity slip by. And good luck, the commander said as they drove back to the place where they had fought the sugar-driven battalion the first time. The corporation was shut down, but despite that, the undead confectionery seekers were starting to head toward the battle tram. Crash had flan in his possession. Oh! Coincidentally, the flan napper does exist. Jimmy was right, he thought to himself. Then again, the napper hadn't been a zombie brought into existence by nuclear waste. So impulsively, to protect his flan stash, the lug grew huge in size and bowled over about a dozen or more zombies back into their graves before they could get some peace. But this didn't do the trick. Jen had seen the alert, and so she sped to the scene on her Vespa. Instead of taking the direct approach and blasting the creatures to dust, she sang an ancient song that she was familiar with somehow. This particular melody was one that could send the undead back to their graves and give them much needed peace. The song, in an ancient language, unsung and unspoken, was now translated thus: Return, return from whence you came, back to the comfort of your grave, to the cold ground you call your own, the dewy sod you call your home. Close and shut those sleepy eyes, what dreams may come when down you lie. Return, return, spirit, take wing, soul flee, to you I sing. Return, return, O wandering soul, to your new home, and again be whole. The army retreated and buried themselves in their proper crypts. It was somewhat morbid, frightening, and mystifying all the same. Diamond, you're awesome! Eagle Bones said. He gave her a high five to show support. The other bats were just as impressed with her, and Eagle Bones gave them a rundown of their cooperation with the Sweet Eaters earlier. At least that's over with. I'm beat, and it's late. We need to be heading to California. Glad to have had your help, Diamond. You're a worthy ally and an astonishing singer. If you ever want to join us again, we'd be more than happy to have you as part of our team, the commander said, patting her on the back. Eagle Bones and Diamond quickly exchanged information, and he did something unexpected. He kissed her cheek. Oh, how sweet. For everything, he stated sweetly. Diamond blushed hotly, and the band teased him immaturely, nudging him like school kids. Guys, come on, you're making me look bad, he whined slightly. With that, Diamond said her goodbyes and returned to Albuquerque. Epilogue. The whole team had been exhausted from fighting legions of sweet-toothed undead. The strains of Lovers Loving Love played softly in Eagle Bones' mind as he drifted up to sleep. Maybe someday he would be reunited with Jen? Who knows? All that was important was that the concerts were going along magnificently, and seeing everyone's face light up for their favorite song when their favorite songs were being sung. They all adored the sing-along portion of the concert. To them, it was sacred, meaningful, and worthwhile, and energized them for their next destination. For the time being, villainy had been put to a stop, and the music played on. I love that sentence, too. The music played on. They would still roll on, defeating whatever evil faced them. But for the present, music and camaraderie made their lives a near-perfect paradise. Oh, I love it. Now, that's actually a pretty darn good fanfic. I must say, I'm impressed. Huh. Well, that's it for now. Until next time. Live long and prosper. Ciao tutti.